So how does a drug that we mostly associate with nightclubs and raves get to the very brink of being approved as a medical treatment for severe trauma? I mean, it's a wild journey, right? From the dance floor to the doctor's office. But the real story here isn't about the party. It's about the science of healing. Let's get into it.
You know, this quote from a U.S. veteran who actually went through the therapy, it just gets right to the heart of everything. The goal isn't to get high, it's to get access. MDMA, in this context, is all about creating this temporary, safe window where the mind can finally confront its deepest wounds without being so defensive.
So yeah, that's really our central question for today. We have to look past all the headlines, all the decades of stigma, and just ask, what does the actual hard scientific evidence say about this molecule's potential to heal?
All right, let's start by framing this central conflict. Because on one hand, we've got a potential breakthrough for a really debilitating condition, but it comes with a ton of social and legal baggage. Okay, to really understand how this works, we've got to look past its reputation and zoom all the way down to the molecular level. This compound has a very specific way of interacting with our brain chemistry. So let's get into the neuroscience of it all. How can this one little molecule create a state that allows for such profound therapeutic work? Well, it all comes down to brain chemistry.
Okay, so take a look at these two molecules. On the left, you've got MDMA. On the right, that's serotonin, the key neurotransmitter that regulates our mood, happiness, all that good stuff. See how similar they look? That resemblance, that structural mimicry, that's the whole secret to how MDMA works.
Because MDMA looks so much like serotonin, it's like it has a VIP pass to get inside our brain's neurons. And once it's in there, it does something pretty remarkable. It completely hijacks the system. It blocks serotonin from being stored away, and then, this is the crucial part, it actually reverses the pumps that normally manage serotonin. So instead of pulling serotonin in, the neuron starts pumping it out. The result is just this massive flood of your brain's own feel-good chemical.
So what does that massive serotonin flood actually do to the brain? Well, these brain scans give us an absolutely stunning picture. The blue areas show a big drop in activity, and they're centered right on the amygdala. That's the brain's fear and alarm center. In someone with PTSD, that alarm is basically stuck in the on position. MDMA comes in and, for a little while, just turns it way down. Okay, so that's the theory. That's what happens in the lab. But does it actually work for people suffering from PTSD out in the real world? To answer that, we have to look at the clinical evidence.
Now, before we look at the results, it's really important we're all on the same page about what a phase 3 trial is. This is the gold standard. Think of it like the final boss of medical research. It's a huge, placebo-controlled study designed to prove pretty definitively if a treatment is safe and if it's effective. You have to pass this stage to even think about getting a drug approved.
And in 2021, the results of the very first Phase 3 trial of MDMA-assisted therapy were published in one of the world's top scientific journals, Nature Medicine. This wasn't some small preliminary study. No, this was the main event.
And the results? They were just striking. This graph shows how severe the PTSD symptoms were over the course of the study. See that top line? That's the group that got therapy with a placebo. But that bottom line, in red, that's the group that got therapy with MDMA. The gap between those two lines isn't just statistically significant. For the people in that study, it's a life-changing difference.
So just how life-changing are we talking about? Well, it really all boils down to this one number.
67%. Let that sink in. We're talking about 2/3 of participants. People with severe, often treatment-resistant PTSD, who, after going through this therapy, no longer met the clinical criteria for the diagnosis. For all intents and purposes, they had recovered. That is an absolutely profound outcome, and it's what makes this whole field of research so compelling.
Okay, this is so important to understand. This is not just about taking a pill. The research isn't just studying MDMA by itself. It's studying MDMA-assisted therapy. The drug is the catalyst, but it's not the cure itself.
The whole point here is to use the drug's effects, that quieting of the fear center, that increase in trust and empathy, to open up that temporary therapeutic window. It allows a patient to finally look at their trauma, to process it with a therapist, without being completely steamrolled by the terror and fear that usually come rushing in with those memories.
And this is where the therapist role becomes absolutely critical. And it's not improvised, it's all governed by a very strict protocol. They're not just watching from the sidelines. They spend hours preparing the patient beforehand, building trust. They stay with them for the entire multi-hour session, acting as a guide and a safety net.
And then afterward, they help the patient make sense of it all and integrate those insights into their daily life. The therapy provides the whole framework. The MDMA just opens the door.
So, with such amazing scientific and clinical results, you might think approval is a slam dunk, right? Well, not so fast. The road from a successful trial to a widely available treatment is, unfortunately, long and full of obstacles.
I mean, this timeline just gives you a snapshot of what a complete roller coaster MDMA's history has been, from its synthesis over 100 years ago to a little bit of therapeutic use, to then being criminalized and officially labeled as having no medical use. It has taken decades of incredibly dedicated research, most of it privately funded, just to get it to the point where it is today.
And the hurdles still standing are significant. On one side, you've got the practical stuff. These trials are incredibly expensive, and you have to manufacture a perfectly pure clinical-grade drug supply. But on the other side, you have the huge political and social hurdles, overcoming all that stigma and navigating the massive regulatory barriers that come with any Schedule I drug.
In fact, very recently, advisory panels for the FDA have started raising concerns, which basically signals that even with this strong data, the path to becoming a prescription treatment is far from a sure thing. The debate over the evidence and how this therapy should work is very, very much alive.
Which leaves us with this final, critical question. The science has provided a really compelling case. The data shows a powerful effect. So as this treatment moves forward, are the biggest challenges it faces going to be about refining the science, or are they going to be about overcoming our own social and regulatory hurdles?